Good morning, guys. Welcome to my unboxing and review of the high-grade Witch from Mercury Gundam Naion. This is a 2025 Premium Bandai exclusive release that I got for about $40, which does seem quite a lot for a high-grade, but as you might be able to tell from the thickness of the box here, this will be coming with a large amount of plastic in the box, and this is, of course, going to be from the Vanadis Heart side story, same thing as, I believe, the Lfrith and the Lfrith Anavata. So this kit's whole gimmick is that I do believe it is going to be rather bulky for a G-Witch design, but it also introduces the concept of VSBRs into the G-Witch universe. So as you can see from these two large structures back here, this kit does have two large booster units that can kind of fold down underneath the arms to be used as rifles, much like the VSBRs of the F91, which I'm very much looking forward to because I really do like the F91's design, and I like any mobile suit that uses the kind of VSBR idea. And of course, the Gund bits mounted on the bottom of them can also fly out and be used remotely, very typical for G-Witch designs. So getting right into this box right here, this is in very typical Bandai fashion. It's just going to be using an edited version of some of the promo material with just lightning edited in the background in this monochrome lavender here. So yeah, not really much to talk about here. And of course, as per usual on the sides of the box, there's pretty much going to be nothing. Just an image of the front and back of the Naion here, only in one color though. Still nothing on the sides of the box, so let's get right into it. Inside the box, we will get 5 bags of runners, which does seem about right for being a slightly more involved than your typical high grade. Of course, in addition to that, you will be getting this high grade manual for the Gundam Naion in full color here, showing off a cropped version of the box art there. On the back, you do get a full color spread with the Naion here, with all of its weapons here, showing off the alterable bayonet, the staff-like weapon it has as its main unique handheld weapon. Of course, it has the Vajra, the two VSBR-like structures normally mounted on the back, but can kind of pop down here to the sides and be used as rifles. Of course, you have your Gund bits here, which need to be deployed on the Witch from Mercury weapon display base, sold separately. I do have an extra to use with this kit. You have the Rinko Gund bits, which is just the name for the Gund bits that deploy separately. And of course, you have the shell units on the front of the kit, which you will get stickers to display two different versions of, the activated version with red on black, and the normal version, which is just black. I will be displaying this as the activated version just because I think it's more interesting to look at. Of course, you get some information on the Vanadis Heart story down there. You get your color guide over here in English and Japanese in full color. This does look like it is going to be fairly simple as far as color schemes go. I may end up repainting the metallic orange parts in this kit in a proper metallic orange instead of the injection metallic orange that they use on the runner. So inside the manual, you will of course be getting your parts list here in full color, and then you get into your build. So the head here does look about what I would expect from the high-grade Witch from Mercury line. I do really like that line of kits, and I do plan on reviewing more of them in the future. I have both the Lfrith and Anavata in the backlog. I will take a look at that at some point, as well as the base Lfrith, probably that'll take a look at first just to use as a baseline. But yeah, you build up your head here. You start with the shell unit in the chest that you put 3 stickers on, either the black or the orange on black ones to activate them. And then you have a lot of very nice parts layering here for color separation in the torso. A fair amount of frame being added onto the torso. Lots of layering in general, which should help this kit look really nice. And yeah, the torso does build up in a fairly involved way. Get into the shoulders then, which does seem fairly simple. Just a couple of parts that sandwich together with a metallic orange frame part in between to fill in the hollow spaces. A tiny bit of layering on the shoulder, build up the shoulder joint, then get into the arm, which is going to be very simple, but it should still do the job all right. This kit is doing the modern high-grade thing of using a single elbow joint, but it should still allow for at least a 135-degree bend if any of the other modern high-grade kits are anything to go off of. Of course, you assemble your upper body, then you get into your legs here, which should have more layering than the arms at least. Yeah, and it does look like there is going to be plenty of layering in the leg armor, which is quite nice. The feet are going to be relatively simple. And then you build up your waist here, which is going to be very simple because there's basically no skirt armor to speak of apart from that front plate there. Attach your legs into the skirts, attach the torso into the waist. Then you move on to the weapons, starting with the 2 Vajras on the back. Of course, you build up your Gund bits that will attach onto the Vajras. Then you build up the frame where the bits will attach onto, and insert it into the armor of the Vajra. Get the barrel of the Vajra, the second half of the armor, etc. It does look like it is going to be fairly involved, which should be quite nice. And then of course you build up the sub-arms to attach the Vajra onto the back, or I guess the back skirt part. And then you get into your other weapons. You get your 2 beam sabers there with what look like very short hilts. You get 2 different beam effects, either the long style or the short style. And then you build up the variable bayonet over here, which again, you can use either of the beam effects on. Of course, talking about the different ways to hold the variable bayonet and articulating the Vajras to be used as handheld weapons, and then talking about mounting the gunned bits out on the Witcher Mercury weapon display base. So it does look like it is going to be a fairly involved build on the torso, at least. The rest of it varies in terms of complexity. As for the contents of the bags, so inside the bags you will be getting 12 runners, which does seem about right for a kit like this, but you will also be getting this rather large color correcting sticker sheet, which isn't as bad as it looks, because it is all going to be for the shell units, some black accent details here, and then you will of course get your metallic pink details for the eyes and the head cameras, with just the eyes being here showing off that I do believe the eye mask around the eyes is actually going to be color separated. So of course you're only, as for the rest of the stickers, you're only going to be using about half of them, depending on whether or not you want to have the activated shell units or the inactive shell units. Again, I'm going to be using the active shell units just because I think the metallic red on black does look more interesting. As for the runners themselves, these runners were printed in September of 2025 and are all going to be brand new for the Gundam Naion here. You get runner A here in 4 different colors. You get a nice slightly muted blue color here for the main accent tone seen across this kit. There's going to be things like parts for the upper torso, parts for the waist, etc. You get a primer frame gray here for some inner frame parts for things like the torso. You see your eye mask here for the head. You see your 2 holding hands, an open expressive hand, and some joint parts. You get a clear, slightly pinkish red tone for the head here to color separate the eyes. So the stickers are not entirely necessary because you see the eyes and the front head camera there and the back head camera all color separated out of the box. And then you will be getting a smoky clear part here for a nice layered effect. These clear parts are all going to be going over the shell units to create, again, a nice sense of depth for the shell units. You get runners B1 and B2 in white here with this main lower part shared between the two. The part that is not going to be shared between the two is pretty much all going to be parts for the head over here, and the shared part between the two is going to be all parts for the 2 Vajras that go on the back. So you see the sides of it, you see the parts that go over the barrel, you see all of your Rinko gunned bits over here, and you do see 2 parts for the arms over here. Okay, so it's not entirely for the Vajra. Runners C1 and C2 still in white with this top part shared between the 2 of them. This is going to contain most of the rest of your armor parts seen throughout the kit. You see parts for your legs over here, the fronts of the legs, some armor for the skirts. You see the front of the torso with the shell units for the parts that's not going to be duplicated, as well as the parts to build up the variable bayonet, and then you see the backs of your hands over here. 2 of runner D in a primer frame gray for all of the frame and joint parts you will see throughout the kit. You see parts like the inner frame for the Vajras where the gunned bits are going to mount. You see the joints for the tops of the legs going into the hips. You see the inner barrel part for the Vajras. You see your joints for the shoulders up here and the elbows up here, etc. Runners E1 and E2 in an injection metallic orange. Going to be a number of frame accent parts throughout the kit for details poking through for things like ventilation or heat sinks or things like that, for details like underneath the shoulders, inside the chest, etc. You get 2 of runner F for the rest of the blue accents seen throughout the kit. And lastly, you get runner SB9 in this deep blue here, containing both the short and the long style beam saber effect parts for use with either the beam sabers or the variable bayonet. These are of course going to be the rectangular style peg beam saber effect parts, the same used for the rest of the Witcher Mercury kits and the high grade 00 kits. So yeah, plenty of parts seen inside that kit, which should all come together to give a very pleasant, involved build. So I'll see you after that build. All right. Welcome back. Here is the high-grade Gundam Naion snap-built, panel-lined, and lightly painted. I did end up repainting all of the injection metallic orange parts with a disc-based super metallic orange marker, and I do think it does look really great and help enhance the color scheme of this kit and exactly what it's going for in terms of its aesthetic ideas, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Getting right into the build, this kit is very Witcher Mercury, and that is a good thing. This very much embodies the idea of what Bandai wants to pull off with their modern high-grade kits. There is nary a polycap to be seen. This kit is entirely plastic on plastic and builds up quite nicely and does feel remarkably solid in various areas, although that is not to say it is perfectly solid. There are a few fairly fragile C-clips that are used during assembly that got stress marks just from putting together the kit once. I did have to take a part out and kind of realign it maybe once or twice while I was building up the kit, but that alone should not cause the C-clip to stress like the way it did, which is a little bit concerning. So I do have a couple of concerns if you decide to get this kit long-term and you're a person who likes to kind of repose your kits on the shelf for variety every couple months or something like that. You may want to hold off on that a little bit with this kit. I believe the problematic C-clip I noticed was going to be in the feet. I don't exactly remember. It's been like a week since I built this kit, and I forgot to write down exactly which C-clip was the problem one that I noticed, but yeah, that is a little bit of an issue that you may need to keep an eye out on. In addition, this is mostly kind of an issue on my end, but there are a few parts that have very small nubs or tabs that you are not supposed to cut, and it isn't apparently obvious just looking at the part on the runner, so I was building it a little bit on autopilot, and I missed a couple of them. I did end up cutting them off. It didn't end up mattering all that much. The main offenders are going to be the frame part that the Rinko gunned bits mount onto in the Vajra rifles. There's a small tab that one of the gates is attached to. You're supposed to cut off. I accidentally cut it off. Didn't really matter. The part fit fine. And the other one that I accidentally cut is going to be the smoky clear part covering up the shell unit on the tops of the thighs. They have a very tiny little tab that you're supposed to cut where the gate is. I accidentally cut the tab off. It is a little bit loose on my kit, but it is fitting in there fine. So as long as I don't shake the kit too much, that little bit of clear plastic should be sitting in there fine. So yeah, as long as you pay attention, the build should be okay. And the main concern I have are going to be with the use of some of the C-clips that may end up making this kit a little bit more fragile than it probably should be. But apart from that, this kit is remarkably solid. There is a ton of parts layering, particularly in the torso, a ton of detail, like the metallic orange accents poking through the armor are actually parts separated. There's nice layering with the shell units with the smoky clear plastic going over the color correcting sticker for the shell units on. There's plenty of layering in the leg with all the metallic orange frame accent parts poking through really nicely through the armor to give splashes of color for what otherwise would be a largely kind of monotonous white design. All the metallic orange parts being involved in parts layering and poking through the armor does look really great and give this kit a sense of complexity, at least visually, that is really nice and pleasant to the eye that I really like to see. Another kind of standout part of build complexity that I wasn't really expecting is going to be the Vajra rifles on the back. They are fairly involved and they can get a little bit monotonous, especially with the Rinko gunned bits because you're building 6 of them, but it isn't that big of a deal. And I think the amount of complexity and kind of articulation gimmicks and parts layering and things like that on the Vajras is a very welcome surprise. It really helps them feel like the hefty, weighty pieces of equipment that they are on this model kit and also help to justify the price a little bit. So yeah, the build is very much Mercury-like in terms of all plastic on plastic joints, lots of parts layering, lots of great part separation, and it builds together quite nicely. The only real issues that I had were, one, me not really paying that close attention to the manual and accidentally cutting off a couple of tabs that I shouldn't have because they weren't that obvious, and 2, a couple of fragile C-clips that may pose an issue kind of in the long run with this kit, but for right now the kit is fine. The only real kind of balance issue I will point out is this kit is rather back heavy given the large Vajras. The design does what it can to help this kit not be as back heavy as it can by having the Vajras mount into the waist instead of the back, but it is still a bit of an issue and it was a bit of a challenge to get this kit standing up without doing a massive lean forward on my spinning class base. So getting to aesthetics now, coming back to this kit spinning in the booth, I will of course get into the color correcting stickers I used, any details you would need to paint in yourself before I talk about my opinions on this design. So as you can see, I did use a little more than half of these stickers on the sticker sheet just because, well, the vast majority of them are going to be for the shell units seen throughout this kit. And of course you get 2 of them, one for the shell unit on, one for the shell unit off. I used the stickers to show the shell units being on. So of course stickers 1 and 2 are going to be the metallic pink eye sensor stickers here going on the eyes. Stickers 3 and 4 are going to be for the metallic pink head sensor cameras, one for the front and one for the back. All of these are color and part separated out of the box. They are going onto a plain pink piece. So if you don't want to use these metallic stickers, you can just not use them and the part will be color separated. It won't be entirely color accurate because it won't be in a metallic pink, but it is nicely color separated out of the box. And the rest of these stickers are going to be for the shell units. Stickers 5 and 6 are going to be for the shell unit on the forehead. 6 is the active one, which I used. Stickers 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 are going to be for the chest shell unit here. 10, 11, and 12 are going to be for the active ones that I used, and 7, 8, and 9 are going to be the inactive ones. Stickers 13, 14, 15, and 16 are going to be for the shell units in the shoulders here. 15 and 16 are going to be the active ones that I used. Stickers 13 and 14 are going to be the inactive ones I did not. And stickers 17, 18, and 19 are going to be for the shell units here on the upper thighs. 18 and 19 are for active, which I used, and 17 is for inactive, which I did not. I will have the 9 here in my hand. I can show off some of the metallic orange accent details I was talking about, like these small details poking through the torso. At the bottom of the torso here, you can see a couple of small like joint cap details here on the sides of the knees. Even on the Vajras here, you can see with very small accent details kind of poking through there. This kit has a ton of really nice layering with this metallic orange poking through a lot of the parts to give it a sense of depth that a lot of kits lack. So yeah, this is really nice, and I do recommend you repaint it in a kind of darker, more somber metallic orange as opposed to the kind of like American cheese-like color that the injection metallic orange was out of the box, which I really did not like. So as for the details, you will need to paint it yourself, apart from the metallic orange ones, which are optional. There are only a couple of details I need to paint to myself, otherwise this kit is entirely color accurate out of the box. The only details are going to be these small black stripes coming off of the shell units on the shoulders there, and again a couple of small black stripes coming off of the shell units on the chest. I used a Real Touch Black Gundam marker for that, and apart from that, the rest of this kit is entirely color accurate, which is a pleasant surprise given how kind of busy this kit is, especially in the torso with all of this layered geometry and varied colors. I am very surprised that it is entirely color accurate out of the box, and it's definitely a couple of points in this kit's favor. There is very minimal painting you will have to do on your part in order to get this kit color accurate, apart from repainting the injection metallic orange parts if you're like me and don't like how they look out of the box. As for my opinions on this design, I do really like the Naion here. It does feel like a kind of twisted version of Aerial, where it is taking kind of the main aspects of the Aerial and again tweaking them to make it look more villainous and edgy. It takes the idea of the Aerial's feminine silhouette and kind of amplifies it, kind of really crunching in the torso as much as it can without getting to IBO levels, flaring out the top, giving it super thick thighs. So yeah, I don't know if that clip is going to make it into the video, but as you saw, this kit is quite back heavy and falls over fairly easily. Getting into a natural looking standing pose is a bit difficult, so I hope you don't mind if it is going to be leading forward a bit for the rest of the video up until the posing section. But like I was saying earlier, it takes what the Aerial does and twists it down to the color scheme, tweaking the colors to be a little bit more somber, keeping the same kind of stark white for a lot of contrast, but darkening the tone of blue a little bit and replacing the yellow with a slightly darker orange. Again, this is darker than it was out of the box, but still, it is still a darker tone than what the Aerial uses, which is very interesting and does give it a bit of a twisted, edgy look to it. In addition, this is combining design aesthetics from a few different Gundams here. Of course, Aerial / Calibarn is going to be the main source, this being a Witch from Mercury Gundam, but you also see plenty of design cues from things like the Legilis. In certain aspects, like especially the limb shapes, the arm and leg shapes do very much feel a little bit like Legilis. It does take that silhouette a little bit. And of course, there's a bit of F91 in here with the Vesper-like Vajras here on the back, especially with this darker tone of blue. Is much closer to the tone of blue that the F91 used, and in terms of the orange being included, that also feels a little bit close to F91 with the orange accents for its machine cannons in the torso. So yeah, this does combine design aspects from a lot of Gundams that I do really like how it all came together, especially with the kind of feather-like Rinkos coming out of the Vajras to give this kit a very impressive, unique silhouette, especially combined with its main weapon, the variable bayonet. That big long staff really does give it a kind of witch-like aesthetic, which is really cool to see. So yeah, I do really like this darker, villainous, twisted version of Aerial that feels a little bit unnatural and a little bit uncanny, especially in that stark contrast between the, again, the very bright white here and the slightly darker color palette for the rest of the kit. I really do love how this kit looks. For a quick size comparison, here is the high-grade Gundam Naion next to a standard size Tiger being the high-grade Blue Destiny Unit 1. So as you can see, the Naion towers over your average high-grade, even with it leaning forward like this, taking away a little bit of height that it should have. This kit is, I think, either like 19.5 or 20 meter tall mobile suit in universe, so this is going to stand significantly taller than your average high-grade, and especially with the Vajras deployed or with the variable bayonet equipped, this will take up a lot more space than your typical high-grade on the shelf, so make sure to account for that if you want to pick this kit up. In terms of your accessories, here is the high-grade Gundam Naion with everything it comes with. This kit does have a few more options than what's displayed here, but that's because it's integrated fairly smartly into the mobile suit itself, so we'll talk about that in a moment. Starting with your hand options, as per usual, you will get the two standard high-grade holding hands you see on the kit right now, and you will also get this open expressive hand only for the left side. For your less impressive standard melee option, you will have two short beam saber handles stored in the top of the torso here in these holders. They are a little bit difficult to get up, so let me grab a pair of tweezers. And once you lift these covers up, you can see the beam saber handles stored inside of this part of the torso. It is rather small and unimpressive, especially compared to the variable bayonet down there. So yeah, while this does have the beam sabers, and you will see them in a token pose in the posing section, they aren't really anything to write home about, and I would definitely not recommend using those weapons with this kit if you want to display the unique aspects of this kit. Of course, for use with those beam sabers, you will get 4 different beam saber effect parts. You will get these 2 kind of standard length beam saber effect parts with the flat bases here, very typical for Virgin Mercury. They use the rectangular pegs in this clear blue. And you will also get the 2 short style beam saber effect parts. This one fell to the floor. I didn't realize and accidentally ran it over with my chair a few times, which is why it is a little bit deformed. But of course, the other one here is mounted on this kit's main handheld weapon, the variable bayonet. I forget the exact name for it. I'll throw it up. I probably threw it up on screen beforehand when I just called it the variable bayonet. But of course, you get this staff slash spear weapon, which does look really cool and help enhance the kind of, I guess, unique silhouette of the Gundam Naion with this fairly unique weapon. You can, of course, equip it with a beam saber effect part, either the short style or the long style. In this video, you'll be seeing the long style with the beam sabers and the short style with the variable bayonet here. Just because this is such a long weapon, it will have trouble rotating around around in the booth if I decide to use the long style Beam Saber effect parts. But just in case you want to equip yours with the long style Beam Saber effect part, it would look like this, a very long, impressive weapon, which stands taller than an average master grade. So yeah, this will take up a ton of space if you decide to use the standard length Beam Saber effect part with this weapon. It also has a handle that can tilt down like so if you want to hold the variable bayonet like a ranged weapon. You will of course also get the 6 Rinko Gund bits stored on the back of the Vajras when they're not in use, and when you want to use them, they can of course just come off of the pegs that they're on, and they will be able to mount on the Wish for Mercury weapon display base, which you will see in the posing and conclusion section. So yeah, you get 6 of these, and they can deploy if you want to show this kit using some remote weaponry, so that is pretty cool. As for this kit's heavy ordnance, you will of course have the Vajras themselves, very similar to the VSBRs of the F91. They are going to mount a subarm, which can kind of swing down and into position when the kit wants to grip onto this handle here, and when you want to show that the Vajras are in use, the barrel part will slide down. It is very tight on the rail on the frame here, so be very careful. That's one part I neglected to mention in the build section. The connection for the actual sliding gimmick is rather tight, so if you don't kind of work in the rail a few times before you assemble it, you will end up snapping the rail. That happened to the right side here. I had to plastic cement it back together. It has been curing for over 24 hours now, so hopefully it will hold for the conclusion section, but yeah, to avoid that, make sure to slide the tab on the rail a few times just to work in it a little bit and prevent it from getting caught. Otherwise, the frame part is very easy to snap here. But of course, when you want to use the Vajras, this white part will slide down. Yeah, you can see the frame part coming out a little bit there. Even though I worked this in a few times, it is still quite tight, but yeah. When you want to show the Vajras aren't used, the white part will slide down and expose this part to actually fire the beams inside of the Vajras. So yeah, very cool heavy ordnance, and this kit does have a fairly complete accessory spread, really only missing some duplicate hand option parts for the open expressive hand, in my opinion. So getting into articulation now, starting as per usual with the head for an upward look. The Naion does get a fairly nice upward look there. For a downward look, the kit can give a slight mean downward glare, but apart from that, nothing too impressive. You can kind of pull the head off of the ball joint a little bit to get a slightly further downward look, but I don't think that's intended articulation. You get some very nice side to side tilt there, and of course the head can 360 on the ball joint. Just be careful because of how tight the kind of collar section is for the Beam Saber holders. The head will collide with it and want to pop off its socket. In the shoulders then, for a shoulder swing, you will get about a 45-degree forward shoulder swing. The arm can, of course, 360 in its socket. It is a little bit difficult to articulate without colliding with anything because of the Vajras back here. The shoulder armor can rotate up and down a little bit independently of the arm to facilitate. And over 135-degree side raise, almost last shooting level, before the arm will end up colliding with the rather thick shoulder here. You can 360 the arm in the upper bicep, a single bend in the elbow, will give just over 90 degrees of bend, a little bit disappointing, but still serviceable. In the torso then, for a forward ab crunch, you do get a fairly decent forward ab crunch. For backwards ab crunch, you get a very nice backwards ab crunch, which normally would be an issue if the Vajras were attached into the back, but they're attached into the waist. So while they do cause a balance issue, it isn't exacerbated by them being attached into the torso. You get some okay side to side crunch, and there is 2 points of rotation, one in the upper torso, one into the connection for the waist. So you do get some very nice kind of twisting motion here as you rotate the torso. So while the joint is capable of 360ing at the waist level, realistically you are limited by the Vajras to about a 45-degree tilt to either side. In terms of the Vajras themselves, they are on a sub-arm, which will allow for the Vajras to kind of swing down and around. Of course, the handle can articulate up for when you want to have the Naion holding onto them, and the barrel has the articulation gimmick I showed off earlier. In addition, the Rinko Gund bits can rotate back and forth about a peg like so, if you want to get a little bit more dynamic posing out of your kit. In terms of the waist, then, there is no skirt armor to speak of. The front is on a peg that can rotate side to side, but it doesn't really enhance the articulation all that much. And the back, well, not really skirt, the back armor here is fixed in place. For your kicks, then, there is no hip drop or hip swing mechanism, so for front kicks, with no skirt armor to speak of, you can get over a 135-degree front kick. You can get just under 90 degrees of side kick before this very tall thigh will kind of wedge into the waist there. And for back kicks, if I try to swing the Vajras out of the way, yeah, the most you can get out of the leg is just under 90 degrees before the leg will collide with the subarm itself. If I swing the leg out a little bit, You can't get a much higher back kick of nearly 180 degrees, but this looks extremely unnatural. I don't think you will ever need to pose your kit doing anything close to that. In terms of rotation, you can 180 the leg outwards. Inwards, you get basically no rotation because of this crotch armor here and how thick the thighs are. A double knee joint will give you about 90 degrees of bend before the very thick leg proportions will collide with each other. There is a slight armor separation gimmick with these two plates on the sides of the leg holding still while the leg articulates to expose this very nice kind of kneecap and these orange joint caps here on the sides of the knees that look quite nice. In the feet, then, this ankle armor here is on a ball joint, which will do ball joint things, and these slightly awkward feet do have a heel-toe separation that allows for a slight toe dip like so, and basically no toe raise because of this ankle armor. For overall toe dips, you get a very nice 90-degree toe dip. For overall toe raises, you unfortunately only get maybe 45 degrees because of this ankle armor. In terms of your side to sides, you get all about 45 degrees to either side, and you get basically no rotation. You get some slight rotation here and this kind of like, I don't know, like very flat, like duckbill foot thing. You get some very slight rotation side to side, and you can kind of spin it around if you want, but it does look very awkward. So yeah, articulation for the Naion is generally quite good. It's a bit mediocre in the elbows, and the feet do leave a bit to be desired in certain directions, but overall the Naion is a pretty good poser and should be able to pull off most of what you would want it to, at least on a stand, because on the ground you are limited by the balance issues with the rather large Vajras back here, as you saw from the kit tipping over earlier. But let's get this kit into some poses. So getting the high-grade Gundam Naion into a spin, starting with the usual running and gunning pose. Here it is, using the alterable bayonet, not variable bayonet. I realized I have been calling it the wrong thing this entire video. In its rifle form, with 3 Rinko gunned bits kind of formed around the alterable bayonet to enhance its firepower. So this demonstrates a few things. One, despite the Naion's very back-heavy nature, it is capable of balancing on one foot, albeit with considerable difficulty. It was very annoying to get it into this kind of pose, and I don't think it's most conducive to the Naion's strengths. 2, the Rinko gun bits are actually a fairly interesting way to display the Naion's weaponry, and having it form around the alterable bayonet like this really does kind of enhance the, I guess, intent of the Naion to articulate as much firepower as it can in one direction while still kind of remaining mobile and nimble. And the open expressive hand in the left side also enhances this pose quite a bit, but having the Naion needing to kind of lean forward to the super extreme degree while it's running to maintain balance, while it does on one hand kind of enhance how hard it looks like it's running, it also makes it look a little bit awkward, like it's about to tip over, partially because it actually kind of is. It is very kind of tenuously balanced here, and it is about to tip over if a breeze hits it the wrong way. So yeah, not really the best way to display the Naion, and while the alterable bayonet is a very interesting weapon, I think it works best when you're displaying it with the Naion looking like it's either a staff or a spear. Having it like this in its rifle mode does look a little bit awkward. I think with how thin the weapon is, it really doesn't look the greatest as a ranged weapon. So yeah, displaying the Naion with its alterable bayonet in rifle form does seem a little bit awkward. There are a couple of poses with the Rinko gun bits that I do think are a little bit more conducive to the Naion's strengths. You'll see later one where it's kind of directing all 6 of the Rinko bits to attack forward in front of it with the open expressive hand, and another one where it's kind of gracefully descending with the alterable bayonet in its staff form in the middle of all of its Rinko gun bits surrounding it, which I think is a much better way to display this kit. So yeah, while it is capable of pulling off a pose like this, it really does not play to the Naion's strengths. So to cover all my bases, here is the Naion in a kneeling pose, post beam saber slash here with the long style beam effect parts, and this also shows a few things. One, the Naion's bulk does make it look a little bit alright in a pose like this, and the excellent articulation of the legs due to not having skirt armor also allows it to hit a fairly natural looking kneeling pose. This does look fairly alright, but again, I think the Naion looks a little bit better in motion or in preparatory poses. In a pose like this where it is very low and planted to the ground, it looks a little bit chunky and loses a lot of the kind of grace that this design does have underneath its kind of wacky, twisted proportions. So yeah, also the beam saber, like I mentioned earlier, is probably the least interesting option to pose the Naion with when you have so many other unique options to pose it with, like the alterable bayonet or the Vajras or the Rinko gunned bits. Posing it like this with just the beam saber seems fairly underwhelming. So the beam sabers are definitely the least interesting of the Naion's weapons, and I definitely would not pose it with it, but this kneeling pose can look okay, especially in a diorama display, but by itself, to make the most out of the Naion's strengths and unique characteristics, this is definitely not the pose to do that. So getting the Naion in the air, here it is in a kind of wide-legged stance on the Action Base 7, firing the Vajras down in front of it in a kind of almost slightly widespread fire stance where it's covering as much area as it can with the Vajras, and this also shows off a few things. As much as I thought I would really like to have this kit use the Vajras as handheld weapons, because as I mentioned earlier, I really do like the concept of VSBRs, and whenever a mobile suit has them, I really love to pose it using them. With the Naion, it's not really the greatest option. Having the Vajras just kind of flare out and act like they're firing without the Naion gripping them looks okay, but having the Naion actually have to grip onto the handles was quite awkward. Getting the Vajras into position was very kind of cumbersome and unintuitive. It was very difficult to actually get the Naion to hold the Vajras in any kind of, I guess, convincing way, which isn't helped by the proportions. Because of how low the Vajras are mounted on the Naion, being mounted on the back skirt instead of the back, and just with how it swings out by the Naion, it has to grip onto the Vajras where it's closer to the Naion's knees. In more natural posing, ideally you would want to have these kinds of weapons out by the waist, or if you want to have it in a more kind of, I guess, energetic kind of pose, you would want to have it like kind of clutching the weapon underneath the armpit or something like that. Having it droop down this low to the knees looks a little bit awkward and cumbersome, which is why I don't think the Naion looks its best actually holding onto the handles of the Vajras. I do appreciate that it was included, and the Naion has good enough articulation to actually grip onto the handles, but it was very awkward to do so and doesn't look the greatest just because of how low the Vajras are positioned on the Naion. So yeah, it was a little bit surprising to me just how not great this looks, and I would rather have the Vajras, again, just kind of wide firing alongside the Rinko gunned bits, kind of without having the Naion holding onto it. I think the Naion looks its best holding onto the alterable bayonet. Holding onto the Vajras does look a little bit awkward and does not play the best to the Naion's strengths here. So, while I get into the conclusion, I'll have the Naion here in this kind of charging forward pose, gripping the alterable bayonet with both hands, about to swing it like it's a big spear. So it shows off that the Naion does have decent enough arm articulation to actually clutch onto the alterable bayonet with both hands, although it doesn't necessarily look the most dynamic. You can't really get it winding up all that well with the alterable bayonet in a kind of melee strike like this. It looks decent as a spear in a preparatory pose on the ground, but in this charging pose, in this mid-action pose, it doesn't necessarily look the greatest. Definitely if you want a more, I guess, dynamic action-oriented pose out of using the alterable bayonet like a spear, you're going to want to use the open expressive hand to mime the Naion like it is about to grip it with both hands instead of actually gripping it with both hands. So in conclusion, the high-grade Gundam Naion is a very high-quality Witcher Mercury build that takes a little bit of the weirdness of the designs that they allow in Vanadis Heart and brings it to life in the high-grade scale. The Naion is a lot bulkier than other Gundams seen in the Witcher Mercury series without getting to like cumbersome or awkward levels of bulkiness like you see with something like the Lfrith. This kit also makes use of the witch aesthetic to great success, wielding a very staff-like weapon in the alterable bayonet, and bringing in some of F91 into the Witcher Mercury universe by having the VSBR-like Vajras mounted on the back. In terms of the build, the Naion is very Witcher Mercury-like, and that is a good thing. This kit is entirely plastic on plastic, with plenty of layering, particularly in the torso and the Vajras, which all build up in a very satisfying premium high-grade way that is definitely involved enough to sink your teeth into if you're looking for a more involved build. Certain parts are fairly simple like the arms, but there is still enough layering and things like the shoulders to still have this feel high quality across the board. There are a couple of issues with the build, however, particularly in areas like the C-clips used in the Vajra subarms as well as the feet. They did stress a little bit just from assembly, so this is definitely a kit I would be very careful with while posing, and I would hold off on reposing this kit if you like to do that, because despite how good it looks in a variety of poses, the fragility of the C-clips does lead me to believe that this kit may kind of degrade over time in terms of durability in those aspects, and the ankles and the subarms for the Vajras. So yeah, be careful while you're posing this kit just to not overstress those C-clips. In addition, there are a couple of parts in this kit you need to pay close attention to while you're building that have small details you're not supposed to snip off, but aren't immediately apparent just looking at the part, such as the small tabs and the smoky clear plastic going into the upper thighs and the shell units, as well as the frame part holding onto the Rinko gunned bits in the Vajras. Just pay attention to the manual while you're building this kit and don't do it on autopilot like I did. It isn't the biggest deal in the world if you accidentally snip them off, but it is just something you will want to pay attention to. In terms of aesthetics, the Naion is nearly perfect. There is a rather large color correcting sticker sheet that comes with this kit, but very similar to a lot of the other Gundams in Witcher Mercury, a lot of it is going to be for the shell units, which is very understandable. I do wish they would have that really nice kind of, I don't know exactly what they called it, but that like pre-printed etched plastic thing for the shell units that were included in some of the Witcher Mercury kits that looked really nice. I would definitely prefer having that over color correcting stickers, but the color correcting stickers look fine, especially with the sense of depth created with the smoky clear plastic going over them. It is perfectly acceptable. The only other parts you will need to paint in yourself are going to be some black extensions coming off the shell units in the shoulders and the chest. Apart from that, this kit is entirely color accurate. The only other thing you may want to paint in yourself is going to be to paint over the injection metallic orange orange parts for all of the kind of like heat sink or ventilation or auxiliary jointed details seen throughout all this kit is nicely color separated, but the injection metallic gold does look a little bit American cheese-like, and I'm not the biggest fan of that, so I painted it over using a disc-based super metallic orange marker. So you may want to paint it over as well, and I do think it really enhances the slightly darker, twisted aesthetic this kit is going for if you decide to do that. In terms of this kit's design language, well, it is really going for a mix of things, combining aspects from the Aerial/Calibarn, just that kind of G-Witch typical Gundam look, as well as aspects from the Gundam Legilis in terms of the limb proportions and the arms and legs, and the F91 in terms of including VSBRs, and the slightly darker color palette it decides to use with a slightly darker blue and orange instead of the typical bright Gundam blue and yellow. And this kit really does twist the protagonist Gundam look of G-Witch, exaggerating the feminine silhouette to the point where it's like super crunching the torso, almost to IPO levels, flaring out the top of the chest, and giving it really massive thighs and very leggy proportions to again twist the kind of feminine silhouette of something like the Aerial into something a little bit more grotesque, villainous, and edgy, which is definitely very interesting. And I do like when suits like these kind of play off of expectations from protagonists or good guy coded suits in order to give this kind of uncanny edginess. So I do really love what the Naion did, kind of twisting what we would expect from a more protagonist-coded G-Witch design. In terms of accessories, this is where the Naion is really going to be quite interesting. In terms of its uninteresting options, it will just come with 2 standard holding hands and an open expressive hand, and for its most basic melee weapons, you will get 2 very short beam sabers. Where this kit gets interesting is, of course, in its main handheld weapon, the alterable bayonet. This very staff-like weapon, again enhancing the witch part of the G-Witch aesthetic, that can also be used as a spear or a beam rifle. It does look a little bit awkward when used as a beam rifle, but it looks perfectly serviceable as a spear, and looks really great when it's being used as a staff alongside the Rinko gun bits mounted on the Vajra rifles mounted on the backpack. Of course, this kit's main ordnance is going to come from the Vajras themselves, which are, for all intents and purposes, VSBRs with fully articulatable kind of opening up gimmicks to expose the business end of the beam rifle. The VSBRs do have a very wide range of articulation, being able to swing any which way you want. Really, the only part of the articulation of the VSBRs that's going to be limited is going to be by the proportions, by the very large legs. It is kind of difficult to get them into position because of that, even when the articulation of these subarms allow for a whole lot more. Speaking of articulation, this is also where this kit is fairly strong, with decent articulation across the board. It is lacking in certain areas. Some foot articulation is certainly lacking because of the ankle armor, and the elbow bend being only a little over 90 degrees is a little bit underwhelming, and doesn't allow you to do certain things like clutch the alterable bayonet closer to the chest for certain posing, and also, in addition to the proportions of this kit, limits how you're able to pose this kit actually holding onto the handles of the Vajras. But apart from that, this kit does have fairly nice articulation across the board, with of course the articulation in the legs and ankles being a standout due to the, well, proportions of this kit not really having any skirt armor to speak of, enhancing the kicks, and the C-clips in the angles allowing for a full 90-degree downward tilt, also enhancing certain graceful poses you may want to have this kit in. The only disappointments in terms of posing and aesthetics is that, well, it doesn't come with any kind of stand to actually pose the Rinko gun bits, but that is a common kind of gripe that I have with the G-Witch line, so it's not really something uniquely bad for the Naion. So yeah, articulation for the Naion is excellent across the board, and it does work really well in a variety of different poses. The Naion is a very versatile poser, and which makes it a little bit more of a shame that the C-clips do seem to be as fragile as they are, because this is definitely a kit you can get a lot of mileage out of in terms of reposing it, because it just has so many different things it works well in. So would I recommend this kit? At $40, the Naion is a bit pricey, but in my opinion, it is well worth what you get inside of this box. The sheer variety of the Naion, how well the design is actually executed in the high-grade line, not needing any color-correcting paint besides a few minor black details extending out of the shell units, an excellent build across the board, a nearly fully complete accessory spread, again, just wish it came with a stand to use the Rinko gun bits without you needing to buy the Witcher Mercury weapon display base separately, and excellent articulation allowing for a wide variety of posing, means that this kit is a full, complete package that really feels like a premium high grade that you're paying the premium price tag for. So if you like this design, I would say definitely pick this kit up if it gets reprinted. Again, if you can help it, do not go to resellers, but if this kit gets reprinted, I would say pick it up. It is a unique addition to your collection, even among G-Witch kits. It definitely feels like the designers are allowing themselves to go kind of buck wild with the side story kits. The designs for Vanadis Heart look amazing in general. I am looking forward to taking a look at the Lfrith and Anavata in the future. I think it's definitely indicative of that trend where they're allowed to do weird, wacky things with these G-Witch Gundam designs. So yeah, I do really love how the Naion looks. I think it would be an excellent addition to any collection, and it is definitely a full, complete package that really does this design justice in the high-grade line. So that was my review of the high-grade Gundam Naion. What do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, make sure to sub to notification bell so you know future uploads. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'll see you next time with my review of the high-grade Choryujin. I'll see you then.